All right, guys. All right, guys, let's look at the review sheet. All right, guys. We're going to start off with problem number 2, 36x squared minus 49b squared. Is there a greatest common factor between these two terms? There's no common factor. Now, we do have two terms being subtracted, so there's a good chance it is a difference of perfect squares. We'll come back to it here in a second. Now, the general form for our difference of perfect squares, a squared minus b squared, is a plus b times a minus b. So if we can find the values for a and b, the numbers that go in those two spots, we can just fill them in their corresponding spots, and we're done. So figuring out what times itself is 36x squared. So what times itself is, 36 is 6. And x squared would be x. What times itself is 49b squared? 7b. So we can fill it in because a is going to be 6x, b is going to be 7b. So a plus b would be 6x plus 7b, and a minus b would be 6x. Questions on number 2? We can look at 1. Is there a greatest common factor between these three terms? Well, 6, 36, and 71 do not. They all do have a greatest common factor of a. We would have b, but not just b, but b squared. So if we factor ab squared out of 6a cubed b squared, we'd still have the 6, but the a would become a squared. B squared factors out completely, minus 36. The a and b squared factor out completely, plus 71. When we factor an a out of a squared, we are left with a. B squared factors out completely. And the rest of it doesn't factor. There are 3 on the test that do just have a greatest common factor, but both of those will not leave you with a quadratic left inside the parentheses. You won't have 3 terms. Well, it would be a quadratic. It's just going to end up being 2 terms. So that's it there. So there are 3 problems that just have a greatest common factor. 1 on the part 1, 2 on part 2. Questions on 1 or 2? Let's look at number 2. 4x squared plus 12x plus 9. Is there a greatest common factor? We'll have 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. All right, guys, focus. Third term is positive, so the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. Plus and plus. Yep. If the third term is positive, signs are the same, match sign of the middle term. Third term is negative, the signs are opposite. Now we're going to find the factors of 4x squared first. Well, x squared is going to be x, and factors of 4. So well, 1 and 4 and 2 and 2, we can do 2 and 2 first. Factors of 9 are 1 and 9 or 3 and 3. Our last part of factoring is to check and make sure we do have the middle term. 2x times 3 is going to be positive 6x. 3 times 2x can also be positive 6x. 6x plus 6x does give us 12x. So 2x plus 3 times 2x plus 3 are our factors. questions on number 2? We ready for the next one? Let's look at problem number 4. Yep.
I can tell you just by looking at it. Parentheses A.
Yeah,
plus
look at it again.
Freaking. I said just by looking at it.
Well, I'm not gonna throw up.
Other parentheses A plus.
Okay, shut up.
A plus 2, A plus 2. All right, let's look at number 4. X squared plus 6x minus 27. Is there a greatest common factor between these 3 terms? Third term sign is negative, so the signs are opposite. One's going to be positive, one is negative. All right, guys, focus. Factors of the first and third term, so our factors of x squared are x and x. Now the factors of 27 are 1 and 27. 1 and 27, 3 and 9 are our only 2 sets. Which one do we want to try first? Then we can check this here, make sure we do get a positive 6x. Now x times negative 9 would be negative 9x. 3 times x is going to be plus 3x. And negative 9x plus 3x is negative 6x. Yes, whenever we get the correct number for the middle term but wrong sign, we need to switch the sign, because that would now give us positive 9x minus 3x, giving us the positive 6x that we wanted. Let's look at number 6. 64x squared minus 1. 64x squared minus 1. So we do have 2 terms. And most likely this is going to be our difference of perfect squares. X squared, x to the second power, gives us a hint that it's probably a difference of perfect squares, not a difference of 2 cubes. Because we would need x cubed for it to be a difference of 2 cubes. We just need to figure out what A and B are. What times itself is 64? And x. What times itself is 1? So A in our case is 8x. B is 1. So A plus B would be 8x plus 1. A minus B . Guys. All right, guys, focus, focus. Questions on 6. Questions on number 7. A to the third is A, and the cube root of 1 is 1. So this here is the sum of 2 cubes. Now we can look at the general form. A cubed plus B cubed. A cubed plus B cubed factors to A plus B times A squared minus AB plus B squared. So this is just the general form. Now just like what we did with the difference of perfect squares, the sum of 2 cubes, we can do the same thing because we found what our A and B are. Now incidentally enough, here A is going to be replaced with A, and B is going to be replaced with 1. So I can come here, so A plus B, well it'd be A plus 1. Inside the parentheses, we'd have our a term, which is just a being squared, minus, then we'd have a times b, so a times 1, plus our b term being squared, so 1 being squared. It would be good to put it in the parentheses because we're not just going to have a and 1. We're not going to have a single term. We could have more than one. Now at this point here, we're going to simplify. Now the a plus 1, that first set of parentheses, is going to normally be as simplified as it gets. Our a being squared here is going to become a squared, minus our middle term, a times 1 is 1a, or just a, plus 1 squared is so we can use the methods we've gone over in class, or we can just replace a and b with their terms and simplify where needed. Questions on number 7? Questions on 8 through 11 here. One of these that y'all want to see.
Now, all those are pretty self-explanatory. Right.
Greatest common factor between these three terms.
If there is one, it's down to 7.
Okay, what else?
7. X. Oh, but not a square.
Because I can remove 2 x's from each one, because if we remove 7x squared from 49, 7 from 49 would be 7, guys. Focus. Up here. If we factor an x squared out of x to the 4th, we're left with x squared. If we factor 7 out of 343, we have 49. And if we factor an x squared from x to the 3rd, we're left with x. And 7x squared factors out completely. And that's it. Questions on 8. Let's look at number 8. 8x squared minus 72. So there's a good chance this is our difference of perfect squares. What times itself is 8x squared?
8 or X? 8X. What? What time is itself?
Because we can check by taking the square root. Square root of 8 is 3 times 3 is 9. Is there a greatest common factor between 8x squared and 72? So what goes into 8? So 72, is it divisible by 2? Is 72 divisible by 4? Is 72 divisible by 8? So the greatest common factor between 8x squared and 72 is 8. Because if we factor the 8 out of 8x squared, we're left with x squared. If we factor the 8 out of 72, we divide 72 by 8, we get 9. All right, guys. X squared minus 9. It is now a difference of perfect squares, because what times itself is x squared? On the first spot, since x squared was in the first, its factors x and x go in the first. And 3 and 3. Questions on number 8? All right, guys. Questions on this here? Questions on what we've done so far? Questions on 13 or 14? 12, 13, 14. Any one of these three that y'all want to look at? 13. 375a cubed plus 192b cubed. So since it's a sum, there's a good chance it's a sum of 2 cubes. So we need to see what a and b are. What number times itself 3 times is 375. So we can get the calculator and take the cubed root of 375. Point. So it is not a perfect cube. So a cubed b cubed is telling us that there's a good chance this is a sum of 2 cubes. So we need to check greatest common factor. Is there a number that goes into 375 and 192? So does 2 go into both of them? No. So we can try 3. 375 divided by 3 is? Okay, let's try 192. Is it divisible by 3? All right, let's see if we can take the cubed root of 125. Let's see if we can take the cubed root of 64. Square root would be 8, yes. Cubed root is 4. So cubed root, we're trying to find what times itself 3 times. So the cubed root of 125a to the third, what times itself 3 times? Is this would be 5a. And the cubed root of 64b cubed would be 4b. There's 4b times itself 3 times. 4 times 4 is 16, and 16 times 4 would give us 64. 5 times 5 is 25, and 25 times 5 would get us to our 125. Now, what we're putting in place of a is what? 5a. So in the first spot, we would have 5a, plus we're replacing b with 4b. So we're replacing a with 5a, b with 4b. So our first spot would be 5a plus 4b. And the bigger one, our first term is a squared. So we replace the a with 5a, and it is being squared. In the middle, a times b. Well, our a term is what? A, and our b term is 4b. Plus, our b term is still 4b, and it's being squared. It's not always going to be that a is being replaced with a, b is with b. It's just coincidental. Last thing we have to do is simplify. So we still need the 3 times 5a plus 4b. First thing we're simplifying is 5a squared. We're multiplying it by itself. 5 times 5. Almost. Yes. A times a is a squared. 5a times 5a would be 25a squared. Minus 5a times 4b. 5 times 4. 20. And then we have our a times b. 20ab. Plus 4b squared. 4 squared. 16b squared. And that's it. 12 or 14, which one do y'all want to look at? 14. 729x cubed minus 8. So the first thing we can see is if we can take the cubed root of 729. Is 9. So the cubed root of 729x cubed is 9x. Cubed root of 8 is 2. Now our difference of 2 cubes, or difference of 2 cubes, a cubed minus b cubed is equal to a minus b times a squared plus ab plus b squared. So we have our a, in this case would be what? So we'd have a minus b, so 9x, minus our b term, which is 2. In the bigger set of parentheses, the first one is a squared, so it'd be 9x squared plus a 9x times our b, which is plus b squared, which would be 2 squared. I found a and b, and I just plug it straight in. Now the 9x minus 2 is as simplified as it gets. 9x squared. 9 squared is 81, and x squared is, well, x squared. 9x times 2, 18x, plus 2 squared. That's it. Guys, questions on this here? Questions on 8 through 18. Anyone on those there? We feel comfortable with 8 through 18. All right, 19 through 23. 21. All right, guys, let's look at 21. Is there a greatest common factor between these three terms?
Probably
5?
five.
What else? So 5, because they share it in common. Because 45x squared y, 150xy, 125y. Since they all have y, that will come out too. So if we factor 5 out of 45, we're left with 9. The x squared stays, and the y is factored out completely. Minus, if we factor 5 out of 150, we're left with 30. We still have the x, and the y factors out completely. Plus, if we factor 5 out of 125, we're left with 25, and the y factors out completely. So 5y was the greatest common factor. So we have 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. If the third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign in the middle term. Third term's negative, the signs are opposite. Here, the third term sign is positive, so the signs are the same and match the sign in the middle term. So we'd have negative and negative. Factors of the first term. Factors of 9x squared. Well, the x squared would be x and x. 9 is 1 and 9, or 3 and 3. Okay. Now we need to find also the factors of 25. So we do have 5 and 5, or 1 and 25. Which one do we want to try first? 5 and 5. So if we check this here, 3x times negative 5 is negative 15x. Negative 5 times 3x is negative 15x. Negative 30x. All right, guys. Questions on 19 through 23? We feel good with these factors, using greatest common factors, factoring our trinomials, difference of perfect squares, sum and difference of cubes. All right. Let's look at 27 and 28. 27. Let's look at 27. Yes. Let's look at 27. Is there a greatest common factor between these two terms?
12.
What else? X squared. We can factor 12x squared out of both these terms. If we factor the 12 out of 12x cubed, it factors out completely. And factor the x squared out of x cubed, we're left with x. Minus, if I factor 12 out of 144, 12, almost the x squared factors out completely. Now, since what we have left, the x is to the first power, we're done. There's nothing else we can do with it. Let's look at the next one, 15x squared plus 30x. 15, anything else? Mm-hmm. So if I factor 15x out of 15x squared, we're left with plus, if I factor 15 out of 30, 2, and the x factors out completely. So that's it. Guys, focus. Questions on 27 or 28?
You need to get a job. You can't even get a battery for your car, Danny. We've been waiting like 6 months.
How's he supposed to get a battery if you don't have a job? I wrecked my mom's car. Did she tell you all about that?
Yeah, she knocked the freaking mirror off. She told me crying about it. I was like, hey, is your mom mad?
Let's look at this one. I'm just adding this one in.
Where was this?
I'm adding this one in.
Oh, is it not between 9?
Well, we'll do it in a minute.
No.
Is there a greatest common factor, guys? Is there a greatest common factor between these two terms? XY, 3. Now, if we factor 3xy out of 9x cubed y cubed, well, 9 would reduce to x cubed reduced to squared and y minus 1. Now, x squared, y squared, there is a chance that might be a difference of perfect squares, because what times itself is 1? What times itself is x squared? What times itself is y squared? What times itself is 3? So even though everything but the 3 is a perfect square, since the 3 is not a perfect square, this is not a difference of perfect squares. This is as far as we can take it. Now, if I change it to say plus, we do not have a sum of perfect squares. This is, again, as far as it goes. So there'll be 3 where all we can do is take a greatest common factor. They're going to look more like this, 27, 28, and this one. For what you have left inside is 2 terms. But again, especially if they're subtraction or cube, just make sure they're not one of these 2. Let's look at 29. X to the 4th minus 32x squared plus 256. Is there a greatest common factor between these 3 terms? Guys, focus. Third term is positive or negative. So the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term, which is negative, negative. Factors of the first term. X squared and x squared. If it could be x and x cubed, because that does give us x to the 4th, but if that were the case, we would have an x cubed term and an x term. We'd actually have 4, not 3. Factors of 256. 1 and 256. No, 4 and 32? No. 64. Yeah, 4 and 64, 8 and 32. Which one of these do we want to try first? if we check this here, x squared times negative 16 is negative 16x squared. Negative 16 times x squared is negative 16x squared. Negative 16 minus 16 is negative 32x squared. Is that the middle term we wanted? Is this factored completely? Let's look at the first set of parentheses. We have x squared minus 16, yes? Yes. What times itself is x squared? X and x, 16 is 4 and 4. So this here is actually a difference of perfect squares. We'd add x plus 4 times x minus 4. Well, this other set of parentheses is the same thing, yes? So x to the fourth minus 32x squared plus 256 factors to x plus 4 times x minus 4 times x plus 4 times x minus 4. They can actually factor all the way down. Any questions on any of these here? All right.